Ethan Walker adjusted his collar for the 10th time, glancing nervously at his reflection in the polished window of the transport shuttle. He looked out of place among the finely dressed dignitaries and officials, their flowing garments shimmering with embedded crystals that seemed to pulse with their emotions. The Scifi Gala was nothing like anything he had ever attended. For one, he wasn't sure why he had been invited at all. Ethan was a simple engineer from a remote human colony. He spent most of his days repairing agricultural drones and maintaining water filtration systems. The invitation to the gala had come as a shock, delivered by an official-looking Scifi courier who refused to answer any of his questions. It wasn't until his best friend, Jacob, had nudged him into accepting that he reluctantly agreed. "You're always working," Jacob had said. "This is your chance to do something exciting for once." Now, as the shuttle docked with the massive Scifi space station, Ethan felt anything but excited. He stepped out onto the platform, immediately surrounded by the grandeur of alien architecture. The station's interior glowed with soft blue and silver light, and the air carried a faint, sweet scent that he couldn't quite place. Scifi attendants in flowing robes guided guests toward the main hall, their voices melodic and calm. Ethan followed the crowd, his footsteps echoing in the vast corridor. When he entered the hall, his breath caught. The room was enormous, with a high ceiling that displayed a holographic view of distant galaxies. Floating platforms carried alien musicians, their instruments producing hauntingly beautiful melodies. Around him, humans and aliens mingled, exchanging polite smiles and nods. He felt like a fish out of water. The humans at the gala were diplomats, scientists, and military leaders, people of importance. Ethan was none of those things. He gravitated toward a corner, hoping to blend into the background. That's when he noticed her. A Scifi woman stood across the room, her presence commanding yet graceful. Her pale lavender skin shimmered under the soft lights, and her silver hair cascaded down her back like a river of starlight. She wore a long, flowing gown that seemed alive, shifting colors subtly as she moved. But it was her eyes that held Ethan's attention, large, deep, and glowing faintly with an inner light, as if she could see straight through him. Before Ethan could look away, her gaze locked onto his. His heart skipped a beat as she started walking toward him, her movements smooth and purposeful. The crowd seemed to part for her, as if she were someone of great importance. Ethan suddenly wished he had stayed on his colony. "You are Ethan Walker," she said when she reached him. Her voice was melodic, each word carefully enunciated. She didn't ask. She stated it as a fact. Yeah, that's me," Ethan replied awkwardly. "And you are?" "I am Cirilla, of the Scifi High Council." She studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "You are not what I expected." Ethan wasn't sure how to respond to that. He scratched the back of his neck, feeling the heat rise to his cheeks. "I'm not sure what you were expecting, but I'm just an engineer. Probably a mistake inviting me." "There is no mistake," Cirilla said firmly. "You were chosen for a reason." Ethan frowned, confused. Chosen? For what? Cirilla didn't answer immediately. Instead, she gestured toward a nearby table. "Walk with me. There is much we need to discuss." Ethan hesitated but followed her. The table she led him to was set apart from the others, draped in fine fabric and adorned with intricate glass sculptures that seemed to hum faintly. She motioned for him to sit, and he did so, feeling more out of place than ever. As soon as they sat, attendants appeared with trays of food and drink. Ethan barely noticed them. His attention was fixed on Cirilla, who seemed to be studying him again, her glowing eyes intense. "I know this must be strange for you," she began, her tone softening slightly. "But your presence here is significant. It may even determine the future of my people." Ethan blinked, stunned. "My presence? I don't understand. I'm just a guy who fixes machines. How could I possibly be important to your people?" Cirilla leaned forward slightly, her voice lowering. "Because humanity is unique. Your kind possesses qualities that the Scifi need, desperately. Ethan opened his mouth to reply but froze. Something about the way she said desperately sent a chill down his spine. The gravity in her tone made it clear this wasn't just a diplomatic gesture. Whatever this was, it was serious. And Ethan had the sinking feeling he was about to find out just how serious. Ethan sat stiffly, unsure if he should be flattered, worried, or outright terrified by Cyrilla's words. The elegant alien across from him was calm, her movements measured as she lifted a delicate glass of glowing blue liquid to her lips. Meanwhile, his mind was racing. What could the Scifi possibly need from him? He was nobody important, just an engineer trying to survive in the colonies. I think there's been some kind of mistake, Ethan said finally, his voice cracking slightly. I'm just me. I'm not a scientist, or a diplomat, or anything special. Cyrilla's glowing eyes met his, their intensity almost overwhelming. You underestimate yourself, Ethan Walker. Your kind is more extraordinary than you realize. Ethan raised an eyebrow, skeptical. Extraordinary. I spend my days fixing water pumps and drone circuits. That's not exactly extraordinary. She tilted her head slightly, a faint smile appearing on her lips. And yet, it is. Humans possess adaptability and ingenuity that other species, including mine, find enviable. Your resilience, creativity, and genetic diversity are qualities that Scifi desperately need. He leaned back in his chair, frowning. Genetic diversity, what does that mean? Cyrilla set her glass down and folded her hands in front of her. Our species has reached a critical point, Ethan. For millennia, we perfected our biology, eliminating diseases and weaknesses through genetic engineering. But in doing so, we lost something vital, our ability to evolve naturally. Our population has stagnated. Birth rates are declining, and our people grow weaker with each generation. We are at risk of extinction. Ethan stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. That's terrible. But what does that have to do with me? She hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. We have studied many species across the galaxy, searching for a solution. Humans are the only species whose genetics are compatible with ours. Your resilience and ability to thrive in diverse environments make your DNA invaluable to us. Ethan's stomach churned as he began to understand. You're talking about breeding. Cyrilla nodded, her expression serious. Yes, a union between our species could ensure our survival. It is why you were chosen. You represent the best of what humanity has to offer. Ethan blinked, stunned. He wasn't sure whether to laugh or run. Wait a minute. You're saying you want me to have kids with an alien? That's insane. Cyrilla's gaze didn't waver. I understand this may be overwhelming, but it is not insane. It is our only hope. He pushed his chair back, shaking his head. No way. This has to be some kind of joke. I didn't sign up for this. It is no joke, Ethan, she said, her voice soft but firm. And you have a choice. This is not something we would force upon you. But before you decide, I ask that you hear me out. Ethan hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to leave. But something in Cyrilla's eyes, a mix of desperation and sincerity, made him pause. Against his better judgment, he sat back down. Fine, he muttered. Talk. Cyrilla relaxed slightly, as if she had expected him to bolt. The Scifi are a proud people, but pride will not save us. We have long avoided seeking outside help, believing we could solve our problems on our own. But now we have no choice. We are reaching out to humanity because we believe in your potential, your spirit. Ethan folded his arms. You could have just asked, you know, instead of springing this on me at some fancy gala. Her lips twitched in a faint smile. Perhaps our methods were abrupt. But we needed to approach this delicately. You are not just a potential partner, Ethan. You are a symbol of hope for my people. He shook his head, still struggling to wrap his mind around it. Why me, though? Out of all the humans you could have chosen, Why pick a random engineer? You are not random, she said firmly. Your psychological profile, genetic markers, and personal qualities align with what we seek. You are intelligent, resourceful, and compassionate. Those traits are as important as your biology. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. This is crazy. Even if I agreed, which I'm not saying I will, how would this even work? We're completely different species. Our scientists have developed a way to make it possible, Cyrilla explained. Through advanced technology, our DNA can be harmonized, allowing for viable offspring. It has been tested and proven. Her words didn't make him feel any better. The weight of what she was asking was enormous. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the future of an entire species. Cyrilla leaned forward, her voice softening. I know this is difficult, Ethan, but I ask you to consider not just what it means for us, but what it could mean for humanity. Together, we could create something extraordinary. Ethan didn't respond. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, confusion, fear, and a strange sense of responsibility. He didn't know what to say, but one thing was clear. His life would never be the same. Ethan couldn't sleep that night. Cyrilla's words echoed in his mind, refusing to let him rest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her glowing gaze and heard the desperation in her voice. The idea of being a symbol of hope for an entire species felt surreal, almost laughable. But the weight of it pressed down on him, making it impossible to ignore. The next morning, Ethan tried to distract himself by exploring the Scifi station. It was a stunning blend of art and technology, with walls that shimmered like liquid light and corridors that curved organically, as if the station were alive. Alien species from across the galaxy moved about, each one more fascinating than the last. But even the breathtaking sights couldn't push Cyrilla's proposal out of his mind. As he wandered aimlessly, he heard a soft, melodic voice behind him. Ethan Walker. He turned to see Cyrilla standing there, her expression calm but expectant. She was dressed in another flowing gown that seemed to shift colors with her every movement. He sighed, knowing he wouldn't be able to avoid her forever. You found me, he said, his tone half joking, but mostly resigned. You are not difficult to find, she replied with a faint smile. May we speak? Ethan hesitated, then nodded. I guess I don't really have a choice, do I? You always have a choice, Cyrilla said, her tone gentle. That is what makes humanity remarkable. She led him to a quiet garden-like area within the station. Strange, bioluminescent plants glowed softly, casting a serene light. The air was warm and carried a faint floral scent. Ethan couldn't help but feel a little calmer in the space, even as his thoughts continued to race. Cyrilla gestured for him to sit on a curved bench made of what looked like polished stone. She sat beside him, her movements as fluid as ever. I know this is a lot to ask of you, she began, her voice quiet. But I hope you understand how critical this is for my people. Without your help, and the help of others like you, we may not survive another generation. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. I get that it's important, but this isn't just about survival. You're asking me to turn my whole life upside down for a species I barely know. Cyrilla nodded, acknowledging his point. That is true. But consider this. Humanity has always thrived on connection and cooperation. It is in your nature to help those in need. And in doing so, you have achieved incredible things. Ethan frowned, still unsure. Even if I wanted to help, how do I know this isn't some kind of trap? For all I know, your people could just be using me. Cyrilla's glowing eyes softened, and she placed a hand over her chest, a gesture Ethan recognized as a sign of sincerity in Scifi culture. I cannot make you trust me, Ethan, but I promise you, my intentions are genuine. The survival of my people is at stake, and I would never deceive you about something so vital. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, Ethan felt a flicker of sympathy. He could see the strain beneath her calm exterior, the weight of responsibility she carried. But he still couldn't shake his doubts. "What happens if I say no?" he asked after a long pause. Cyrilla's expression grew somber. "If you refuse, we will respect your decision. But our search for willing participants will continue. Time, however, is not on our side. Every day, our numbers dwindle, and the chances of finding another compatible match grow slimmer." Ethan looked down at his hands, struggling with the decision. He had always thought of himself as an ordinary guy, someone who fixed machines and lived a quiet life. Now, he was being asked to play a role in something far bigger than himself. It was terrifying. Before he could respond, Cyrilla spoke again, her voice softer now. "Ethan, I do not ask this of you lightly. I know what I am asking is immense, but I believe in the potential of what we could achieve together, not just for my people, but for yours as well." Her words struck a chord in him. The thought of helping an entire species survive was daunting, but it also stirred something deep within him, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt before. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "I'm going to need time to think about this." Cyrilla nodded, her expression understanding. "Of course. Take all the time you need. But whatever you decide, know that your choice will have a lasting impact, not just on my people, but on the future of humanity as well." As she stood to leave, Ethan remained on the bench, staring at the glowing plants around him. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, fear, doubt, and a tiny spark of curiosity. He didn't know what he was going to do, but one thing was clear: his life was no longer ordinary. Ethan didn't leave the garden for hours. He sat on the smooth, cold bench, his thoughts circling endlessly. Every time he thought he had made up his mind, another doubt crept in, twisting his decision into uncertainty. How had his quiet life as a repair engineer turned into this? He had come to the gala expecting awkward small talk and free food, not a proposal to help save an entire alien species. The sound of soft footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. Ethan looked up to see a young Xanthari male approaching, his skin a darker shade of lavender than Cyrilla's. The alien's expression was neutral but curious, his glowing eyes giving him an unreadable aura. "You are Ethan Walker," the Xanthari said, his voice smooth but formal. It wasn't a question. Ethan sighed. "Yeah, that's me. What now?" Another speech about humanity's potential. The Xanthari tilted his head slightly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Not quite. I am Thaler, a researcher for the Xanthari Council. Cyrilla asked me to ensure you are comfortable." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Comfortable. That's one way to put it." Thaler sat down on the bench beside him, his movements deliberate and graceful. "I understand your hesitation. What we are asking of you is no small thing. But I wanted to offer a different perspective." Ethan leaned back, crossing his arms. "I'm listening." Thaler gestured toward the glowing plants surrounding them. "Our people have always valued perfection. In our pursuit of it, we forgot what it means to adapt, to grow through challenge and change. Humanity, on the other hand, thrives on imperfection. Your ability to innovate, to turn weakness into strength, is something we have lost." Ethan frowned, unsure if he should feel flattered or insulted. "So what? You need humans to teach you how to mess up." Thaler chuckled softly, a surprisingly human-like sound. "In a way, yes. But it is more than that. Your resilience is woven into your very being. It is in your DNA. And that is why we need you." Ethan stared at him, trying to make sense of it all. "What's in it for us? For humanity, I mean. Why should we help you?" Thaler's expression grew serious. "Because our survival is tied to yours. If the Xanthari fall, the balance of power in the galaxy will shift. There are other species, far less benevolent, who would seize the opportunity to expand their influence. Humanity's colonies could become targets." Ethan's stomach tightened at the thought. The colonies were fragile enough as it was, still finding their footing in a galaxy full of powerful and often hostile civilizations. The idea of becoming collateral damage in someone else's war made his skin crawl. "So, you're saying this isn't just about your species," Ethan said slowly. "It's about protecting humanity too." Feller nodded. "Precisely. Our alliance could ensure stability for both our people." Ethan rubbed his temples, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "This is too much. I didn't sign up to be some kind of savior." Feller's expression softened. "You are not a savior, Ethan. You are a bridge. A chance for our species to learn from one another, to grow stronger together. But the choice is yours. No one will force you." Ethan looked away, his gaze drifting to the glowing plants. He wanted to believe Feller's words, but the enormity of it all was suffocating. Could he really make a difference, or was he just a pawn in a game far bigger than he could understand? As Thaler stood to leave, he placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, a surprisingly warm and human gesture. "Whatever you decide, know this. Your willingness to even consider our plea speaks volumes about the strength of your character. That alone gives me hope." Ethan didn't respond, and Thaler left him alone with his thoughts. Hours later, Ethan found himself wandering the station again. He wasn't sure where he was going, but his feet seemed to have a mind of their own. Eventually, he ended up in a quiet chamber filled with holographic displays. Each one showed scenes of Xanthari life, cities shimmering with light, families gathered around strange, glowing objects, and fields of alien crops tended by graceful hands. One display caught his eye. It showed a group of Xanthari children playing in a meadow, their laughter silent but unmistakable. They looked so full of life, so hopeful. Ethan felt a pang in his chest. He thought of his own childhood, running through the dusty fields of his colony, dreaming of a future where humanity thrived among the stars. "Am I really going to let them fade away?" he muttered to himself. The sound of footsteps made him turn. Cirilla stood in the doorway, her expression calm but tinged with worry. "Have you found your answer?" she asked softly. Ethan took a deep breath, his heart pounding. He didn't have all the answers, but one thing was clear. He couldn't walk away. Not from this. Not when so much was at stake. "I'll do it," he said finally, "but on one condition." Cirilla's eyes glowed brighter, a rare smile gracing her lips. "Name it." Ethan straightened, determination hardening his voice. "We do this on my terms. No more secrets, no more surprises. If I'm going to help you, I need to know everything." Cirilla nodded, her expression resolute. "Agreed." As they left the chamber together, Ethan felt a strange mix of fear and hope. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he felt like he was part of something bigger, something that mattered. Ethan had never felt so out of his depth. Days after agreeing to help the Xanthari, he found himself seated in a high-tech lab aboard their station. The room hummed softly with energy, its walls lined with holographic panels displaying complex data. Cirilla stood nearby, her usual grace replaced by an unusual tension. Scientists moved around them with quiet efficiency, their movements smooth and calculated. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "You said I wouldn't be a guinea pig," he muttered, eyeing a strange, glowing device nearby. Cirilla's lips twitched into a faint smile. "And you will not be. This is merely a preliminary scan to ensure compatibility. Think of it as a medical checkup." "That's comforting," Ethan replied dryly, though his heart was racing. He had agreed to help, but that didn't mean he trusted this process entirely. A Xanthari scientist approached, her pale lavender skin glowing faintly under the lab's lights. "Ethan Walker," she said, her voice calm and professional. "This will not harm you. The scan will analyze your genetic structure and map the potential points of harmonization with Xanthari DNA." Ethan blinked. "A harmonization. You're making it sound like we're about to perform some weird sci-fi to it." The scientist tilted her head, clearly puzzled by his humor. Cirilla chuckled softly, stepping in to explain. "It means our DNA can be aligned to ensure any offspring are healthy and viable. The process is entirely non-invasive. Ethan sighed, leaning back. Fine. Let's get this over with. The scientist activated the device, which emitted a soft hum and began projecting a grid of light around Ethan. He felt a slight warmth, but nothing uncomfortable. As the scan progressed, he caught glimpses of his DNA being displayed on a nearby panel. It was surreal to see himself reduced to glowing strands of genetic code. After several minutes, the device powered down, and the scientist stepped back. "The initial results are promising," she said, her tone neutral. "Further analysis will be required, but the genetic compatibility appears strong." Cyrilla's expression softened, relief evident in her glowing eyes. "Thank you, Lyra. That will be all for now." The scientist nodded and left, leaving Ethan alone with Cyrilla. He stood, brushing off imaginary dust. "So, I passed the test. What happens now?" Cyrilla gestured for him to follow her. "Now, we discuss the next steps. There is much to prepare, and your input will be crucial." Ethan hesitated but fell into step beside her. As they walked through the station's winding corridors, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was spiraling into something far beyond his control. Yet, a small part of him, a part he didn't fully understand, felt a sense of purpose. They arrived at a private meeting room, its walls displaying serene landscapes of alien worlds. Cyrilla motioned for him to sit, and she took a seat across from him. "We will proceed carefully," she began, her tone calm but firm. "This partnership must be built on mutual respect and understanding. You are not just a participant, you are a collaborator." Ethan leaned back, crossing his arms. "Collaborator, huh? That sounds a lot better than genetic donor." Cyrilla's lips curved into a faint smile. "It is more than that. This is not just about creating offspring. It is about forging a bond between our species, a future built on trust and cooperation." Ethan studied her, trying to gauge her sincerity. "You're really putting a lot of faith in me. What if I screw this up?" "You won't," Cyrilla said simply. "Your willingness to stand here, despite your doubts, proves your character. That is why I chose you." Ethan blinked, caught off guard by her words. He wasn't used to being seen as anything more than an ordinary guy. The weight of her trust in him was both humbling and daunting. Before he could respond, Cyrilla's expression grew more serious. "There is something else you should know. Not all of my people support this initiative. There are factions within the Xanthari who believe we should not involve humans. They see it as a sign of weakness." Ethan frowned. "And they'd rather let your species die out than ask for help." Cyrilla nodded, her gaze steady. "Pride can be a powerful force, but we cannot let it dictate our future. That is why this must succeed." Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Great. So not only am I signing up to save your species, but I'm also painting a target on my back." "You will be protected," Cyrilla assured him. "But yes, this will not be without challenges. That is why your cooperation is so vital. Together, we can prove that this partnership is worth fighting for." Ethan rubbed his temples, the enormity of the situation sinking in. "You make it sound so easy." "It is not easy," Cyrilla admitted, "but nothing worth doing ever is." For the first time, Ethan saw something in her eyes that he hadn't noticed before, a flicker of vulnerability. Despite her calm demeanor, Cyrilla was carrying the weight of her entire species on her shoulders. And now, she was asking him to share that burden. "All right," he said finally, his voice steady. "I'm in. But if we're doing this, we're doing it right. No cutting corners, no rushing. We do this together." Cyrilla smiled, a genuine warmth in her expression. "Together." As they left the room, Ethan couldn't help but feel like he had taken the first step on a path he could never have imagined. He didn't know where it would lead, but one thing was certain. He was no longer just an ordinary engineer. He was part of something far bigger and far more important than himself. Ethan stared out of the viewport, his eyes following the endless stretch of stars. The Xanthari station was quiet at this hour, but his mind refused to settle. He had agreed to help them, but the reality of what that meant was still sinking in. His life had been simple before, fixing machines, sharing jokes with Jacob, and dreaming of the occasional adventure. Now he was entangled in something far beyond his comprehension. The door to his quarters chimed softly. Ethan turned, half expecting another Xanthari scientist with yet another update on his compatibility results. Instead, it was Cirilla. She stepped inside, her gown shimmering faintly in the dim light, and offered him a small smile. "You're restless," she said, more a statement than a question. Ethan shrugged, motioning toward the stars. "Hard to sleep when you're about to make history, or maybe a huge mistake." Cirilla approached him, her expression calm but thoughtful. "Doubt is natural. It is the mark of someone who understands the gravity of their choices." Ethan leaned against the wall, folding his arms. "Yeah, well, gravity feels pretty heavy right now." She smiled faintly, stepping closer. "You have already taken the first step. That is often the hardest." Ethan sighed. "It's not just the decision that's messing with me. It's everything that comes with it. Your people, the politics, the expectations. I didn't ask for any of this." Cyrilla's glowing eyes softened. "I know. And I will not pretend this path is easy. But you are not alone in this. We will face the challenges together." He studied her, searching for any hint of insincerity, but there was none. For all her calm and grace, Cirilla carried the same burden he did, perhaps even more so. The thought gave him a strange sense of comfort. "I just hope we're doing the right thing," he muttered. "We are," Cirilla said firmly. "But there is something you must know. Our efforts have not gone unnoticed." Ethan's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "There are factions within the Xanthari who oppose this alliance," she explained. "They believe involving humanity is a betrayal of our traditions. Some have already begun to act against us." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "Act against us? Like how?" Cirilla hesitated before answering. "Sabotage, spreading misinformation, even threats of violence. They are small in number, but they are determined." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, the weight of the situation pressing down even harder. "Great. So now I'm not just helping your species survive. I've got to watch my back too." "You will be protected," Cirilla assured him. "But we must be vigilant. The success of this partnership depends on proving to my people, and yours, that unity is possible." Ethan shook his head, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "No pressure, huh?" Cyrilla's lips curved into a faint smile. "You have handled the pressure well so far." The faint compliment made him chuckle despite himself. "Thanks, I guess. But seriously, what's the plan? How do we deal with these factions?" Cyrilla's expression grew serious. "We proceed carefully. We will focus on building trust and demonstrating the benefits of our alliance. But if we encounter resistance, we must remain steadfast. The truth will speak louder than their doubts." Ethan nodded, though the idea of facing sabotage and dissent didn't sit well with him. He had agreed to help, but he hadn't signed up for a political war. Still, walking away wasn't an option anymore, not when so much was at stake. "All right," he said finally. "But if this goes sideways, don't say I didn't warn you." "I will not," Cirilla replied, her tone gentle but resolute. "Together, we will succeed." The next day, Ethan found himself in the heart of the Xanthari Council chamber. The room was vast and circular, its walls lined with floating platforms where council members observed from above. Cirilla stood beside him, her presence commanding yet calm. A holographic projection illuminated the center of the chamber, displaying the initial results of the compatibility tests. The lead scientist, Lyra, presented the findings, her voice steady and confident. "These results confirm that human and Xanthari DNA can be harmonized with a 97% success rate," Lyra said. "This marks a significant breakthrough for our species." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Some council members nodded in approval, while others exchanged skeptical glances. Ethan felt their gazes on him, weighing him, judging him. One of the council members stepped forward, her expression stern. "This alliance risks compromising the purity of our species. Why should we trust this human to carry such responsibility?" Ethan felt a spark of irritation but held his tongue. Before he could speak, Cyrilla addressed the council. "Ethan Walker represents the best of humanity," she said firmly. "His courage, adaptability, and willingness to help us despite his own doubts are qualities we should honor, not question. This is not about purity. It is about survival." The council member frowned but didn't argue further. Ethan glanced at Cyrilla, grateful for her support. For all her elegance, she had a sharpness to her that he couldn't help but admire. As the meeting continued, Ethan realized just how much rested on their success. The doubts and resistance weren't going away anytime soon, but he was determined to prove that this partnership could work. By the end of the session, the council agreed to proceed with the alliance, though the tension in the air remained. As they left the chamber, Cyrilla turned to him. "You handled that well," she said. Ethan shrugged. "Didn't really do much." "You were present," she said simply. "Sometimes that is enough." Ethan nodded, her words settling in his mind. The challenges ahead were daunting, but he wasn't facing them alone. And that, he realized, made all the difference. Ethan had barely stepped out of the council chamber when an urgent voice crackled over Cyrilla's communicator. The calm expression she wore slipped, replaced by a rare look of concern. She exchanged a few rapid words in her native tongue before turning to Ethan. "We have a problem," she said, her tone tight. Ethan straightened, already on edge. "What kind of problem?" "One of the anti-alliance factions has made their move," she replied. "They've sabotaged a critical section of the station's life support systems." Ethan's stomach twisted. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough," Cyrilla said. "If we don't repair it quickly, large portions of the station could become uninhabitable." The urgency in her voice sparked something in Ethan. He wasn't a diplomat or a soldier, but he was an engineer. And if something needed fixing, that was where he thrived. "Show me," he said firmly. Cyrilla hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Together, they hurried through the station's corridors, the glowing walls flashing red with emergency lights. Xanthari personnel moved swiftly around them, but there was an air of tension, of fear. The station felt alive, and right now, it was hurting. When they reached the damaged section, Ethan immediately saw the problem. A large console, critical to maintaining the station's air circulation and temperature control, had been deliberately overloaded. Sparks flew from exposed wires, and smoke curled toward the ceiling. Ethan crouched beside the console, pulling out a multi-tool he always carried in his jacket. "This isn't just sabotage," he muttered. "Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." Cyrilla stood behind him, her glowing eyes scanning the room. "Can you fix it?" Ethan glanced at the console, then back at her. "I can try. But I'm going to need time, and someone to keep an eye out in case they come back." "I'll handle that," Cyrilla said, her voice steady. Without wasting another second, Ethan got to work. His hands moved instinctively, disconnecting damaged circuits and rerouting power to bypass the worst of the damage. Sweat dripped down his forehead as the console sputtered and sparked. He couldn't afford to make a mistake, not when the lives of everyone on the station depended on it. As he worked, Cyrilla stood guard near the entrance, her graceful form tense and alert. The hum of the station's systems was broken only by the occasional crackle of static from her communicator. Every so often, she glanced back at Ethan, her expression unreadable. "Almost there," Ethan muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He reached for a tool, only to realize it was just out of reach. "Cyrilla, can you?" Before he could finish, a loud crash echoed down the corridor. Cyrilla spun around, her posture defensive. Ethan froze, his heart pounding. Two figures appeared at the far end of the hallway, their movements deliberate and menacing. They were Xanthari, but their expressions were cold, their intentions clear. One of them carried a device Ethan couldn't identify, but it looked dangerous. "They're here," Cyrilla said, her voice low. Ethan's hands tightened around his tools. Great timing. Cyrilla stepped forward, her tone sharp and commanding. "You are endangering our people. Leave now, and I will not pursue you." The intruders didn't respond. Instead, one of them activated the device, sending a pulse of energy rippling through the corridor. The lights flickered, and the hum of the station's systems wavered. Ethan gritted his teeth. Whatever they just did, it's messing with the repairs. "Stay focused," Cyrilla said. "I'll handle them." Before Ethan could protest, Cyrilla moved with a speed and precision that took his breath away. She was a blur of motion, her gown flowing like liquid as she engaged the intruders. Despite their advanced weapons, they were no match for her. She disarmed one with a swift strike, sending his device clattering to the floor. The other tried to flee, but Cyrilla blocked his path, forcing him to retreat. Ethan forced himself to focus, blocking out the chaos behind him. The console was still unstable, but he could see a solution. With a few final adjustments, the sparks subsided, and the station's systems began to stabilize. The air cleared, and the hum of machinery returned to its normal rhythm. "Got it," Ethan shouted, standing up just as Cyrilla delivered a final blow to the remaining intruder. She turned to him, her expression unreadable, but her glowing eyes brighter than before. "You did it." Ethan nodded, his breathing heavy. "Not bad for a guy who just fixes water pumps, huh?" Cyrilla allowed herself a rare smile. "Not bad at all." As security personnel arrived to secure the intruders, Ethan and Cyrilla stepped aside, their shoulders brushing as they caught their breath. The station was safe. For now. But the danger hadn't passed entirely. "You are incredible back there," Ethan said, glancing at her. "Do all Xanthari Council members know hand-to-hand combat?" "Only the ones prepared to fight for what they believe in," she replied. Ethan smiled, despite the exhaustion settling over him. "I guess that makes two of us." Cyrilla looked at him, her gaze steady. "This is only the beginning, Ethan. But today, you proved something to my people, and to yourself." Ethan didn't reply immediately. He just stared out at the stars, a quiet determination settling over him. He had started this journey as an ordinary man, but now, he was part of something far greater. And for the first time, he felt ready.